presentation. So if you're comfortable showing your face, please do, or at least to make sure to participate via the chat, and then we'll be able to share some of your comments. So I am Dr. Solomon. I am a full-time professor at Troy University. I also have my private practice here in Orlando, Florida. My whole entire area of research is working in self-compassion. And making sure how we can use this tool, especially for individuals that are at high risk of burnout. I want to make sure that Amanda, my co-presenter, introduces herself to you guys, and then we'll take over from there.
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here this morning. I am Amanda, and I'm a doctoral candidate at the University of Central Florida. I've had the immense pleasure to work with Dr. Solomon the past 2 years about studying self-compassion.
Thank you, Amanda. So again, thank you so much for being here. It's really a pleasure to having you all participate so early in the morning for some of you if you're in Chicago town. Well, that's that for us here in Florida. But we're gonna get started right away. Like this is a 4-hour compressed time. But it's going to be a high interactive presentation, and make sure you have something to write on, because I'm gonna have you do the first exercise before I move on. Okay, so if you got something to write on, I want you to make a list of up to 5 things that are most important for you, that you love and that are important in your life. Make a list of up to 5 things that you love and that are most important in your life. I'm gonna give you a few minutes to do that, okay? Make sure everyone is muted. I'm hearing some background noise. Not sure where it's coming from. Okay, so this is what we're gonna do. I'm gonna ask anybody that put themselves first on the list. Anybody, if I move on to this next slide, if I asked you to write the things that you love and matter most in your life, how many of you put themselves on your list? You can respond by unmuting yourself, or you could just send me a message on the chat, and then I'll share with the group. So far, I don't hear anybody or nobody typing, I put myself first on the list. Anybody second maybe on the list? Where you felt that you were the most important? What you love in your life?
I'm seeing a lot of, I didn't put myself first, and I'm seeing a few people say that they put a space or some opportunity to think of themselves.
Okay, good. Thank you for, yeah, I'm gonna have Amanda manage that chat for me so it's easier for me. So thank you for sharing those. Okay. Right.
People are saying they didn't think to put themselves on the list at all.
All right, so some people didn't even cross their mind. Well, you are on that. Okay, I think it was important. I done this presentation with big crowds, small crowds, it doesn't matter. Sometimes I ask people to make a list of 10 things that are important for them. Most of them, some people will be on the list, but most of them will say they didn't even think of putting themselves on the list, at least not directly to think. So why do you think that is? Why is it that we tend to put ourselves last when it comes to what matters most and what I love most? Any thoughts on that? I'll wait for the chat. Why do you think we don't put ourselves on the list? It's like good. Yeah. Yes. Okay, so some people are saying that it might feel self-centered. They might be seen as selfish. And that is the truth, right? As a society, we have been taught that if we put ourselves on the list, we're becoming self-centered, selfish, maybe even narcissistic, right? So there is that fear that we have to keep getting pushed away in order to prioritize our well-being, because that's what ends up happening. You're going to end up putting your well-being second. And isn't that ironic? Because the society is putting that pressure on us, and I'm seeing a lot of responses based on that. But at the same time, don't you need to really care for yourself and love yourself? Wouldn't that give you better results in the end on how you're gonna love and take care of others? So there's some kind of irony, or that it just doesn't make sense to put yourself last, right? So moving on into the next slide here, let me see. Okay, so I want you to park that. I want you to park that idea, that thought for a moment. We're gonna get back to it. But because this presentation is also about understanding happiness, what is making us happy. There's a fascinating study done by Harvard University where this is one of the largest studies ever done globally, with over 650,000 responses recorded from the participants. There were 15,000 participants, and they were represented globally, not just from 80 different countries, but they were also represented from 86 different occupations. In fact, they were represented across all diversity, all socioeconomic, race, ethnicity, ages from 18 into the into the 90s, right? So every area was being covered here. And every participant, 15,000 of them, were equipped with an app. And this app, the investigators were able to reach out to each participant to ask them, what are you doing right now? Randomly, any time of the day. What is it that you're doing right now? And then they will ask a second question, and how are you feeling right now? And they collected all that data, like I said, 650,000 responses. And they had analyzed this data to see, okay, what makes people happy? And their findings were a lot more simple than you will think. Those individuals that found themselves being happier during that time is because they were fully present, maybe even doing something completely ordinary. So that tells you right there that it is, even the people that were planning for a vacation, they were not recorded as happiest. Were those people that were simply in the ordinary moment, fully present when they recorded feeling the happiest. So that tells you something, that the fastest, easiest pathway to get into happiness is to be here, to be now, and to be present. All right, so I want you to get a little taste of what I'm talking about. We're gonna do the following activity. But I wanna check in with everyone first, because I hear a little back. Can you guys hear me clearly?
This one's happiness.
Can you guys hear me clearly? I'm hearing music, I'm hearing stuff, so please make sure that you guys are being muted. Let me, because I don't think I have the ability to mute. Okay, everybody's muted, thank you. All right, guys, so we're gonna go ahead and try this exercise. So get something to write on, again. And I want you to think of a time in your life when you felt the most alive. Close your eyes if you want to. You're behind the screen, nobody is looking at you now. So think of a time in your life when you felt the most alive. And I want you to bring all your senses with you on that. I'm going to invite you to kind of relive that experience as if it was happening right now.
A mini tampon and that's it. Like, they're tiny, but I love them.
If you follow me on Instagram.
And notice how that feels. Notice how it feels being back in that moment again. Okay, so I'm just curious, again, we could use a chat for that. What came out for you? What did you notice that was common on reliving an experience like that? What were the conditions for it? Was it, I'm curious to hear how many of you have maybe family involved, and then Amanda, maybe you can hear me with that, help me with that chat.
Yeah, someone was saying that as they did this activity, their shoulders lowered, and that it was very grounding. Someone wrote combat. I'm thinking that person might be a veteran, and stated that their heart was racing and felt adrenaline.
I'm curious if how many of you was maybe family, where family had something to do with it, a loved one in your life.
So a time when they felt relaxed and amused, a happy moment with family.
Okay.
Someone wrote that their husband was there with them.
But that's a good husband.
Another person wrote skydiving.
Oh, of course.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely will make you fully alive because you're afraid of dying.
And someone else just shared that their daughter was there with them.
Very good. Very special. Okay, so keep them coming. I mean, but I'm gonna keep talking here. So, okay, so that all right, so we're into something here. Happiness, being fully present in the moment, adding those loved ones. Oh, that's a great recipe, right? But then something happens, and that's what I want to talk about. And it's how our brain has unfortunately, the capacity to hijack that opportunity. And that is because our mind wanders about 47% of the time. Yes, my friends, about 47% of the time. And that is when you're not in a high stressful situation. I think with what we're dealing with right now globally, our mind probably wanders even more, right? Because we're constantly fearing and being worried about things. In fact, investigators say that when there's very few activities that humans can do where your mind will be fully present. Can you guess what that one is? One of the activities that humans do where your mind is fully present. Somebody said sleep, but that's actually not the case because you're not fully conscious at that point. Some people say yoga. Bingo. Thank you for those that share sex. That's right. So making love is when humans tend to be fully present. But I know I have some participants in the past that have said, I don't think so. That's when I do my grocery list shopping and things like that. But who knows? Everybody's different, right? But I want to introduce you to default mode network, which is an area of your brain that scientists have been able to identify that actually is that activity that makes it responsible for your mind to wander. So we all have this condition of the mind wandering. And we have been able to identify and see where this activity is in the brain, which is located right down the midlines of the brain from to back. And it serves three basic things. First, it creates a sense of self. It projects that self into the past or the futures and looks for problems, right? Looking for problems. So basically, our mind is time bounded. We use the past and we use those experiences, right? To create a movie in our heads, to then create these scenarios about the future that can cause a lot of fear and anxiety. And then we leave very little room for being in the moment, being mindful, right? And the reason that the scientists are starting to really understand why we do that, right? Because we all do it. It's because our brain is not designed for happiness naturally. Our brain is designed for survival, right? So we have this natural tendency to be negative, and we have to be intentional to be positive. So it's important to understand this, but it is also important to know that we don't have to be slaves of this default or mode network and let it take over us. And that's where mindfulness comes into place, because study after study now is showing how literally the practice of being present here and now deactivates the default mode network in your brain. And I think most of us know by now the definition of mindfulness, which simply means paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, the present moment, and most important, not being judgmental, because it is that content that we have from the past that we bring into an experience where we can become judgmental. So if we can remove that and all we have is the now, then that's not so bad after all, right? Besides, if you're always rushing onto the next moment, what happens with the one that you're in, right? So I want to share some of those qualities of mindfulness, because I want you to think of it as a garden that you have to take care of.
Viděla, že it's like all over America, tak mi zase říkají, kde škvíje jsou ne, tady ne v Mississippi.
Daniela, can you please make sure to mute
Oh,
yourself? So some of the qualities of mindfulness are that you. So I want you, all of us, we're going through difficult times right now, right? With this thing with the COVID-19, and it's difficult to say, oh, trust the fears that you have or trust the stress that you're dealing with, right? But just trusting the feelings and whatever that you're experiencing is the quality of mindfulness. Having a beginner's mind, more of a sense of curiosity on how you're gonna, or what is it that you're experiencing. Letting go of whatever it is that you're experiencing versus resisting that this is not fair, I don't want to have to deal with it. The acceptance that comes with it, and then being non-judgmental and just letting it be for what it is. And all that is great. But the problem is that if you just accept it for what it is, and this is a very painful, stressful situation, that might not be something that you can tolerate. And that's where self-compassion comes in. Because self-compassion is the more active quality of mindfulness, where it's going to help you take care of the self, take care of that moment when you need suffering, when you're in a moment of suffering. So if there's something I want you to remember from this presentation today, is that the only time that you will need self-compassion is during moments of suffering, okay? And if you have any questions, I don't want you to hold them, just kind of put them on the chat, and I'll make sure I clarify. So Kristen Neff came up with this concept where she expanded with the research and started to really, really understand individuals that learn the skill of self-compassion. And her definition simply is when we suffer, caring for ourselves as we will care for someone we truly love. And I'm going to make it a little simpler than that. Simply compassion inwards, right? So in other words, yes, to start putting yourself first on that list is part of being compassionate. And when you put the two together, mindfulness that we're hearing a lot about, but self-compassion is the heartbeat of mindfulness, right? So you can be present and accept the experience, but also you can be mindful to understand, what do I need? How can I care for the experiencer, right? You can ask with curiosity, what is it that you're experiencing? What is it that you're feeling at that time? So then the self-compassion component will say, okay, but then what do I need? What do I need based on what I'm feeling, right? We're gonna make sure, Amanda, maybe you can do this. I'm not sure that we post this presentation for you guys. Maybe on the chat, we can download it. Also the part of when you're suffering and being aware of the moment, then to know, okay, can I be kind to myself during a moment of suffering, okay? You see, we wonder, okay, as a society, we have been conditioned and taught not to put ourselves on the list. On the other hand, as a society, we have also conditioned people to really work on their self-esteem and to feel good about themselves. And the problem is not that you can get there having good the problem is not that you have good self-esteem. The problem is how you're getting there, right? Schools have a love affair about this, right? Let's increase the students' self-esteem. But the problem that we're having is that individuals, in order to feel good about themselves, they use a measuring stick. They need social comparison, for example. if I got a 95 on my test, but I look around and everyone got 100, it's not good anymore, right? So we're constantly looking to defend our ego, right? We get this type of ego defensiveness, right? And it's not sustainable because we all are going to make mistakes. We can't help it. It's part of the human condition. We will all make mistakes. So the problem with that is that when we're failing, when we make epic mistakes in our life, we feel shame, we feel guilt, right? And that's where that inner coach that we have that can be very critical walks in and gets in the way. So in fact, some interesting studies are showing that bullies in school tend to score really high on self-esteem because they have an inflated ego that they feel that if they were to be minimized, they need to protect that. And it can be in a very protective way. If you just wonder how somebody with an inflated self-image looks like, take a look at Rodolfito. He does a great job at that. So Kristen Neff came up with 3 main key components about self-compassion. And these are the 3 right here. Self-kindness. So think of it when you make an epic mistake. I'm gonna use an example. My daughter, she's 30 years old now, and she, a few years back, had gotten a great job offer. She moved to San Antonio, Texas, and she was a marketing manager. And she was super excited about the job. She would call me every day and tell me or her little successes with the job. And one day she was so excited and let me know that my boss just got me a laptop, and this is so exciting. My boss really believes in me to be able to take a laptop home. And then she calls me a week later, crying, very upset because she was walking towards her car, and then all of a sudden she's carrying a cup of Starbucks coffee, and she's holding on to her laptop, right? And as she's walking towards her car, she places a laptop on top of the car, she holds on to her coffee, gets inside the car, drives off, the laptop crashes, and nobody gets to, and it's just broken, it's gone. So she was so upset. She was incredibly hard on herself. She was not being kind during the epic mistake that she made. She's always been very hard about being absent-minded. So that really got the main theme in her head, right? Then there's the term of common humanity. When we make mistakes, when we're in a difficult time, right? When we feel vulnerable, we tend to think there's really something wrong with us and nobody else in the world. In other words, my daughter thinks only I could have made such a huge mistake. Very few people would have done it as bad as I committed. The problem when we do that is that we isolate, and that adds more unnecessary pain to our mistake. And then, of course, mindfulness, which we have talked a lot already about it, but basically we don't just stay with the experience, we add judgment, fear. Her fear in this example is that she was gonna get fired, that they were gonna think that she's not competent and she was gonna get fired, okay? So being loving, being kind during an epic mistake is what we're proposing here. And that will isolate less through common humanity, and then of course mindfulness. What is important to understand is that our society and the way how we approach mistakes in life, right, is to be hard on yourself. We have this inner critic that, especially if we're dealing with perfectionisms, right? If you're being a perfectionist, you're thinking, I need to be hard in order to not make mistakes, okay? So I want you to think of self-compassion as an alternative, or how can you still be successful? How can you still aim for excellence, right? But using a different skill to motivate you. And what we're learning from the research is that self-compassion, even if you never were kind to yourself in the past, is a skill that can be taught. It's always available, and it provides emotional freedom, because that inner critic, I promise you, has never made you feel good, right? So I want to see a little more action on the chat again about what are your expectations about how do you treat a friend? Okay, what do you expect from a real, authentic friend? How should a friend be treated? Especially if that friend is going, if you were going through a difficult time, or your friend was going through a difficult time, how would you treat that friend? What would you expect from that friend? And let's see, Amanda, if you can help me with what people are saying.
Yeah, people are saying that they offer comfort, support, kindness, honesty, empathy. They would listen to the person and be an ear for them and show them love without judgment. Being present with them. You can certainly tell that we have some counselors here. Non-judgmental and being loyal to them.
Yeah, I see brutal honesty too, but brutal honesty, which is good. You want that. You don't want a friend telling you fake things, but it's honesty still would, I would think you will expect it being kind at the same time, not insulting you, right? Yeah, good. Okay, so now I'm gonna ask a second question. I'm gonna ask a second question. How often can we really say that when we're the ones in pain and we're talking to ourselves, that we treat ourselves consistently the way how we treat our friends? Somebody says 0.
Rarely, never.
Jessica, you want to, yeah, thanks.
Oh, how many fish are there? 2 turtles, fish.
Guys, check your mute button. Thank you.
How many fish?
Not very often. No, often. All right, so the next question is why? Why is it that when we have a friend in the moment of suffering and we care for them and we want nothing but what's best for them, why can't we apply the same approach to ourselves? Why do we think that we deserve a different treatment? Okay, so somebody said we hold ourselves to a higher standard. But what does that mean by a higher standard? That we deserve a different level of treatment because we deserve better success? Or is it that we can tolerate being hard on ourselves? Don't we want the same success for our friends?
A lot of responses. So I'm also seeing self-judgment or holding ourselves to a higher standard.
Mm-hmm.
More expectations for myself to be successful.
Somebody said we're our toughest critics.
Mm-hmm.
We are. And the question is, why do we have to hold that space when we will never say some of the things that we say to ourselves, to our friends? There's a saying that if you were to say the things that you say to yourself to friends, you would never have any friends. In fact, some of the things that we say to ourselves, we would never dare to say out loud to our own pets, because it would be like, oh my God, that was so mean, right? So again, there's a disconnect here. And we've been living in our life and our society thinking, I got to be hard on myself, but I know it never feels right when I do it to our friends. So can you start seeing that disconnect, right? So I have somebody, and this is a good segue to let Amanda take over, but somebody here said, and that's Caitlin, I sometimes feel as though if I am nice to myself when I mess up, I'm making excuses for my perceived wrongdoings. So that is a huge misconception, this fear that we got to beat ourselves up in order to learn from the mistake. So I want Amanda to go ahead and take over here and talk about these misconceptions, not from our opinion on what we think about this. This is all based on data and the latest research on those individuals that score high in self-compassion, how they deal with their own mistakes. So Amanda, go ahead.
And time again, when we do presentations on self-compassion, or even when you read literature or books on self-compassion, the authors will address that there's a lot of apprehension from participants around, well, if I'm self-compassionate, I'm just going to keep making the same mistake, or I'm going to pity myself. It's not going to be helpful. But all of those are misconceptions. I don't think I can move to the next slide.
I handle it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So one of the big misconceptions is the idea of self-pity, that I'm just going to kind of put that on myself. I'm not going to be able to look towards the future or get past it. But the idea of self-compassion is that in the moments of difficulty, we don't necessarily shut down and have self-pity, but instead we become active in offering ourselves kindness. It's a different approach and a different perspective that gives us the ability to offer ourselves care in a productive manner. And it also helps us to avoid unnecessary suffering. So what studies show is that when we practice self-pity or self-blaming or self-hatred, is that we kind of kick ourselves down more than we need to be, and then we're hurt. And so that takes us a really long time to recover, depending on what we're saying to ourselves, what that inner critic is saying. It can really push us down. Whereas when we practice self-kindness and self-compassion, we're acknowledging that something went wrong. So Coralis' example of her daughter, that yes, the laptop fell off her car, she made a mistake. And these things happen, mistakes happen. We can also be kind to ourselves and say, hey, I'm not gonna do that again, but this is really horrible, it really sucks, I'm really disappointed in myself. And I also acknowledge that I'm a person, I make these mistakes. It's gonna be okay, I can comfort myself. And that helps us to recuperate quicker so that we can be functioning again and be productive again in what we need to do. And it's also less harmful to ourselves.
Well.
Yeah. The other idea is that being self-compassionate is weak. We hear this quite a bit, but we really want to address this because we know being self-compassionate actually helps us to be stronger, to be healthier, and to be happier in the moment. Self-compassion offers us an opportunity for self-resilience, to be able to overcome. And what we see is there is a study that was done with self-compassion in the veteran community. And what they realized from it was that veterans that struggle with PTSD, but score higher in self-compassion, were able to have a higher protective factor for themselves. And that's really important. So we want to show that being self-compassionate offers us the ability to heal, offers us the ability to overcome, and to provide ourselves with some self-protection to be able to emotionally develop. And it helps us to cope with situations that are difficult. That's really important, is that we're not avoiding anything that's hard, or we're not avoiding a mistake, or we're not avoiding something that we have to do, but instead we're acknowledging it, allowing for our emotions, and being kind towards those emotions as someone that we love dearly would be kind towards us. And a lot of times we hear that self-compassion would increase our self-indulgence or make us less dependable in some capacity, even towards our own behavior. But what we realize again is self-compassion helps us to recover quicker. So in a study done about dieting and eating healthy, what we realized is that, do I have any people out there that love their sweets? I'm an ice cream lover, but does anyone love their cupcakes or their cake, anything like that? Well, if you do, this study might stand out for you. Brownies, yeah, I hear you on that one too. So what this study showed is that essentially it was two groups of people who were, they're all on a diet, and essentially if you choose to eat something that you're not supposed to be eating on this diet, what they found is people practicing self-compassion were able to get back on the diet quicker. Able to say, hey, I made a mistake. I really enjoyed that cupcake though. I really enjoyed that brownie. I really enjoyed that ice cream. It's okay. Everyone deserves a little bit sometimes. And I can go back to my healthy habits and the expectations for myself and keep moving forward. So it gave them an alternative than to punish themselves, kind of that self-critical voice that might say, no, you did something bad. You're never going to make it. You're not going to lose the weight you want or be as healthy as you want or whatever that might be. Instead, it was, okay, it was a one-time thing. I really enjoyed it. So I can appreciate enjoying it, I can be in the moment, and I can move forward.
Okay, so before, I'm gonna have Amanda for you guys to try the self-compassion exercise so you get to taste what self-compassion feels like. But I wanna count what Amanda just shared with you, because this is the part where we get confused, right? We're talking about that many times we use a harsh inner critic, the one that makes us hurt, right? So not only is the experience already painful to begin with because we made a mistake, but then we bring that inner coach, that inner critic that adds even more pain to our experience, right? And that kind of, the problem with it is that it takes our perspective of how to handle the situation and it distorts it, right? Because You have to recuperate from that inner critic first. So I had a participant once that gave me this perfect analogy on how you can look at self-compassion, right? Because we're still aiming at being successful with practicing self-compassion. Our perfectionism and harsh inner critic also wants you to be successful. They both want you to get there, okay? So the problem is that picture if both of them were fuel to a car, right? I'm gonna take that car with self-compassion fuel and the other car to harsh inner critic fuel, and they both will get me there. But eventually, which one is going to ruin the engine? Which one is the one that is gonna end up making us feel worse, create more anxiety? Because the body keeps the toll on the harsh treatment that we do and we offer. But I want you to, based on these misconceptions that we just presented and how, based on the research, it seems that individuals do better with self-compassion. I'm gonna let Amanda try an exercise. So go ahead and get something to write again to see how self-compassion feels like, and open your heart as much as you can to try this exercise.
Perfect. I just added to the chat too that from the previous slides on self-compassion, there is a book out there that we recommend, the Self-Compassion Diet. So I put it into the chat in case anyone's interested in that. As we move forward into this next exercise, I just want to put a preference out there or a precaution that if you've experienced trauma or you have a highly self-critical voice, just to remind yourself to be kind to yourself during this exercise. If there's anything that you're uncomfortable with engaging in, that's okay. Do what feels right for you during this. I like to call this an active mindfulness practice, in that I'm going to ask you at times to write things down, but I also want you to stay present with yourself as much as possible. So go ahead, and I'm going to give you a minute to think about a behavior that you would like to change. Now, this is not a characteristic of yourself in terms of, I want to dye my hair, or my feet are too big and I wish that they were smaller, or something like that, but instead something that you physically are able to do. So it might be, I don't exercise enough, or I don't take enough breaks during the day to really take care of myself. Maybe I want to meditate more or pray more, or I want to eat cake or brownies less. Whatever that behavior is, go ahead and write that down. And if you're comfortable sharing what that behavior is, you can type it into the chat just to have a conversation about this going. Okay, does everyone have something that they'd want to change? Can I just get some yeses in the group, even if you don't want to share what it is? Oh, awesome, thank y'all. I love this group, you all are so responsive.
I know.
So once you have what that thing is that you want to change, I'd like you to go ahead, you can sit back for a minute, I'm not going to ask you to type anything, and I just want you to be present with yourself. If you're sitting in a chair, you can kind of get your body comfortable in it, acknowledge your back against the back of the chair, your feet on the floor. Become mindful in the moment, acknowledge any sounds that you hear. And I'd like you to think about that thing that you want to change, that behavior, rather if it's exercising or meditating more, being present more, whatever that behavior was for you. And I want you to think about when you don't do that behavior and know you should. What are the types of things that you say to yourself? Maybe it's that you're choosing to eat ice cream or chips and you told yourself you wouldn't. What kinds of things come up in your minds? What are the particular words? Maybe what do those words sound like? The tone of those words.
And you want to keep that one to yourself. You don't have to share that in the chat.
Absolutely, thank you, Dr. Solomon. And if you're comfortable, you can go ahead and write some of those things down for yourself. So maybe what those words are in the tone. Think about what it feels like when you say those things to yourself. Maybe if there's tension in a particular part of your body when you hear those things. or how you might be suffering, think about what that does for you in that moment when you say something to yourself. This is a time when you're not doing the behavior that you want. If you wish, try giving yourself some compassion for how hard it is to hear such harsh language towards yourself. Just take a moment to be kind.
Amanda, can I add a little trick on how to do that?
Mm-hmm.
So basically, I want you to think of that same situation that you're writing about, and now I want you to replace it with your friend, your dear friend, a friend that you respect, that you admire, that you want nothing but what's best for that friend, and write it down as you would write it to that friend instead of writing it to yourself, to see what comes up and notice what happens.
We're just going to give you a minute to catch up in case there's anything you want to reflect more on and write down. And then we'll keep going with this activity. So thinking about that critical voice and what it says to you, consider if that voice has any motive to try to help you. If there's any aspect of that voice that is trying to be productive for you, even if it's not a helpful voice, even if it's harsh, what is its intent? And this is really where to practice that self-compassion about what a friend might say to you, because there might not be any redeeming quality for that voice. And that's okay right now. We're exploring what that voice is and the qualities of that voice. So if anything comes to mind about the motivation of that voice, go ahead and write some notes on that down. And as you're writing that information down, think about anything that you would like to say to that voice, any form of forgiveness or any acknowledgement of what that voice might be trying to do for you, even if it hasn't been very helpful, the self-critical voice. You might find yourself able to say, thank you for trying to get me to do this healthier activity, or thank you for trying to make me meditate more. I know that that's a good thing for me, and it hasn't been very helpful how this self-critical voice has said it to me. As you're exploring this, acknowledge if that tone or the sound of that voice, the words as you're reflecting on it, if it sounds familiar to you. It might very well be your own self-critical voice. And maybe you might acknowledge that it could have been a parent's voice. It might be mom's voice or dad's voice or an older sibling's voice. Or it might not have an identity at all, and that's okay too. But anything that you think of in terms of that voice, go ahead and write that down. Okay, so I'd like you to stop taking any notes if you are now, and just to pause. We're gonna try to find our self-compassionate voice in the midst of exploring the self-critical voice. And so to become mindful again in your seats, become comfortable, put down your pen and paper. And I'd like you to think once again about that behavior that you're trying to change, rather meditating more, eating healthier, praying more, going for more walks, whatever that behavior was that you might have listened in the chat or written down, think about that again. And think about as you move forward in the future and you find yourself busy one day or not able to do that behavior or activity. And let's think about something compassionate that we can say to ourselves instead of something self-critical. So I'd like you to close your eyes, and if you're comfortable, no one's watching, you can put your hands on your heart, provide yourself some comfort, or maybe on your lap. Maybe you might just want to offer yourself a gentle hug. And reflect again on that behavior that you're struggling with. And we're going to try to practice some self-compassionate statements we can say to ourselves, but I really want you to explore what feels comfortable to say to yourself. So it might be something, I love you, and I really don't want you to suffer. I deeply care about you, and that's why I want to help you make this change. Or it might be, I don't want you to keep hurting. I'm here to support you. You can take a minute and think about what words you need to hear when you're unable to practice that behavior that you want to do. And if any words particularly settle for you, go ahead and write those down at this time. And I want you to begin to feel a little bit more comfortable in this space. We're gonna come back to the presentation now and reflect a little bit. So I'll give you all a minute to rejoin in that way. So if anyone would like, as we're beginning to rejoin again, you can share in the chat what this activity might have been like for you. If there's anything that you'd like to share in terms of the experience.
I see here that everyone makes mistakes. Some people got emotional, somewhat theory. Some people say it's okay that your best looks different right now.
That's very compassionate, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It was calming.
Did anyone find any words that might be kind or self-compassionate to yourself? Someone just said it's very comforting because I've never said those words to myself. That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
So it feels, for some of us, when we haven't experienced it before, it feels like a shower of honey in your entire system.
Yeah, a lot of different experiences, and we want to acknowledge that this can be a really hard activity. It's why I offered a precaution at the beginning of it. Practicing self-compassion towards our inner critic who might have been with us for years or most of our lives, it can definitely take some time, and it is a skill and a practice that we can continue to figure out what are the right words to say to ourselves and what are the right tones to use with ourselves to be able to comfort ourselves in times of suffering.
Well, thank you so much, Amanda, for such a wonderful facilitation with this exercise. We usually want to spend more time doing these and have people talk into groups, but because of the sake of time, we want to go ahead and move forward. Because I think what's really important is we also want to understand, okay, why does this feel better, right? So you went from a place that felt icky, right, harsh, and then we moved you into this place of self-compassion that felt very reflected, open, liberating, right? So there's something behind what's happening to you, and that's the science behind the self-compassion that I want to show you to you. The physiology of self-compassion versus self-criticism, okay? This is what's happening to you every time you choose to either be kind or be hard on yourself. Basically, when we use the inner critic, coach, right, that internalized critic, we are tapping into the body threat defense system. In other words, we're sending a message to your brain that there is something wrong. And if there's something wrong, your brain says, I have to put the fire down, right? There's something wrong. So that part of your brain that gives you perspective is called the insula, is not going to be working properly, okay? So you're not thinking as intelligently during a moment that you're being harsh on yourself. Let me ask you something. Has any of you have ever felt soothed and relaxed when you were harsh and critical to yourself? Of course not, right? So we're sending a threat message to your brain when we do that. So isn't that ironic? Here we're thinking, I got to be hard on myself so I can learn from the mistake, but you're hijacking your ability to think intelligently. So you're learning nothing while you're being hard on yourself. It's only after you recuperate from being hard on yourself that then you can start thinking with some clarity and be able to figure out what you need to do. Now, when you look at the other hand, which is the physiological underpinnings of self-compassion, what we're doing is we're activating the mammalian caregiving system. And that one is that system in your entire body and mind that makes you feel safe. And that within that safety, your brain is not getting any threats and you can still think clearly. I'm not saying that your suffering will just dissipate. You will still be able to hold on to that suffering, however, and still think with perspective. Let la insula do the work and be able to help you think, okay, so what can I learn from this mistake? What happened? What went wrong? What can I do differently next time? Basically, you just recuperate a lot faster from it, you know? So that mammalian system, there are different ways on how you can trigger it, right? If we're gonna use the science and the physiology, that is, one is like what Amanda was saying, finding some good words, gentle vocalizations, a simple mantra, I am gonna be okay. May I be safe. May I know that I am worthy. And repeating those slowly over and over is a way to do it. Soothing touch. This is a very simple, portable practice. I give it to my clients all the time. I don't know if you knew this, but self-hugging will give you exactly the same feeling of oxytocin release as if somebody was hugging you. Your brain does not know the difference. So sometimes just you becoming your own resource in a moment of pain, you don't have to wait for anybody, but being able to take care of yourself, okay? So again, the practice of self-compassion is very portable. Once you learn the skills, they're simple, right? It's about recognizing how you're suffering, and then how can you attend to that suffering without being hard and still to take you to the place where you want to be successful, okay? So with that being said, I want to make sure I have some enough time for any questions, comments, thoughts. You're a very active group and we love that. But you know, life is just too short. And here we are thinking that we got to be hard on ourselves in order to aim at our goals. And I feel that every time we do that, we're killing a little part of our energy, our soul, what feels good to be human. So I'm just offering you this new alternative, especially in this difficult time. So I have some questions here I want to make sure we take care of. They say, culturally, do you find self-compassion is harder to practice than others? Yes, in fact, it is unfortunately through these Eastern versus Western cultures, where, especially in our society, the American culture, that we are taught to man up, to be tough, right? And that fear, that kind of culture makes us be harder versus other cultures that are more about the compassion in and out towards others. Any other questions or final thoughts? I want to make sure I talk about some tools as well. Amanda is sharing the slides so you guys can have access to them. But listen, if you're curious about this and you want to know how self-compassion, where you score on it, you can take this, go visit this website and take the test. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes. It's free. And you'll be able to see how you score in all the 3 key components of self-compassion. You can also download some free meditations. I have somebody here asking me about how does this work with help rejecting complainers. So it's the same thing. The people that are complaining, there's just a projection on how they feel about themselves, right? What you're gonna learn is that the more you work on yourself, the self-compassion, the less.
Mine complains a lot because mine is dead, not dead.
The more that you learn yourself that you're to be kinder, the less you're gonna project that towards others. You'll find yourself complaining less. You'll find yourself criticizing less others, right? Because it's gonna feel foreign doing it towards others as well. Okay. One of the work that Amanda and I are doing is that we've been training teachers locally here in the district because what we're finding is that this practice of self-compassion is helping professionals prevent burnout. So this is a wonderful practice in order to learn how to deal with very stressful occupations, right? And to still be able to come out of it without being hard on yourself, which can be very depleting. Okay. There are some great tools for self-compassion exercises for young children. If you go online and you just Google self-compassion exercises for children, you'll see it. Also on Amazon, there are some workbooks for children as well, where you'll be able to find those based on self-compassion. I also want to make sure that I share the books, The Mindful Path to Self-Compassion, with Christopher Germer, and Kristen Neff has another one that also in her book, she talks about parenting. She is the mother of a child diagnosed with autism, and she talks about how using self-compassion, dealing with parenting guilt has been very helpful. So we definitely, there's a lot of room. You know, one population that I think about right now, it's our healthcare workers. As I was hearing an interview yesterday of, they're trained to deal with people dying, but not one after the other, where they have to question themselves, did I do everything okay? So imagine how depleted they are emotionally right now, how useful will these self-compassion skills that are so easy and portable to have will be for them in these difficult times. So I don't know, Amanda, do you have any final thoughts before we close it? We want to make sure we finish on time.
I just want to say thank you to everyone for being such active participants in the chat. I think that really made this presentation wonderful, and to remember as we leave this presentation that self-compassion, once again, is a skill. It's great that we all have knowledge of it now, but continual practice is really what's helpful about self-compassion in moments that we're suffering.
Yeah. All right, but with this, we're gonna go ahead and let you go, and may you be happy, may you be healthy, and may you find that space to learn to be kind.